I'm Cavyn Mitchell. I use he, they pronouns. I have a severe visual impairment as well as a bone condition, and I work as a part-time community development coordinator with a trans programme, as well as being a part-time PhD student. So I find it quite challenging to access LGBT plus spaces, both kind of physically and online, simply because a lot of LGBT spaces revolve around alcohol or nighttime culture. And often I find that by the time I get to the end of a working day, I simply don't have the spoons to even venture out, or it's too far away, or there's no accessible transport. So it just becomes this massive thing that, usually people might go out for a drink after work together. And for me, it's a little bit too complex for me to even start to think about doing that. So I often find that the nighttime kind of LGBT scene is quite difficult, or if I do things like I took part in Red Run a couple of weeks ago, which was for World AIDS Day. And I found that really challenging as a disabled person, because nobody understood why I had a cane, what I was doing, or they didn't realise that when the course turned that they needed to tell me, because I didn't know where I was going, I didn't know the location. So new spaces are quite challenging because I don't know the terrain, and I kind of rely on my memory to navigate everywhere along with my screen reader and my phone. So I think trying to access different spaces or programs, often when I'll tell people that I have a disability or that I'm trans, and it's almost like I can only have one or the other. They may know how to cater for my disability, which is great, but they don't know how to gender me correctly or respect my pronouns, or what it even means when they don't respect my pronouns and refer to me as she the entire time. So usually I find it quite difficult, because I then become this complicated person, and it's almost like I'm that token trans disabled person that kind of pops up here and there. So I almost hibernate sometimes, because it's quite difficult to be in spaces where I have to, continually explain my identity or my disability, and even the LGBT community or trans community. There are people who do understand, but a lot of the time people don't understand, and unless I'm actually stood with my cane, which, when I'm sat down, I hide it. It folds up, it fits in my pocket, it fits in a bag. So if people don't see my cane, they don't realise that I have a disability. And then there's that awkward moment of, oh, actually, I can't see that. Can you explain this? Can you, I'm going to need a little bit more help. And then I become a problem or a burden. And then it just, it's just not worth me being in those spaces, which is what I've kind of come to know, even though in London it is a lot better than kind of outside the capital. So I think for me, it was very bizarre growing up, because I grew up in the 90s and there was very little representation of either disability or trans identity or even LGBT identity. So for me, for a long time, I just identified as weird because I didn't know there was any other word for it. And it was only when I kind of moved out towards university and really got a bit more exposure of the world that I realised actually there is a name for everything that I am. It's just I didn't know about it, and I didn't find a community until I was a little bit older. So I spent a lot of time sat in a corner with a book. It's still my natural habitat, but now I can kind of I can talk about the fact that I do belong to communities, and that there is there is a community out there and people are like me. It's just that for a long time as a child, I never knew that existed, or that was a possibility, or that I'd grow up and have get married and think about a family. So those are all things that were just kind of completely not known to me as a child. I figured I was just odd and just abstract, and that I couldn't fit in or do anything. Before I met my wife, I didn't really understand that whole dating realm because I didn't see anyone like me in that arena, and oftentimes people would patronise me or look at me as different, so I could never see myself with someone. When I met my wife, who is also transgender and disabled, we just sort of clicked, and I think it was just being able to be so open. And one of the things that a lot of people ask me is what is wrong with you. So when they first meet me, they'll ask me what's wrong with you. They'll ask lots of intrusive questions. I've even had, when I've been out with my parents, they've asked my parents in front of me, what's wrong with your child? Which is just the worst thing to do. But my wife never asked me what my disability was. She to this day, she just doesn't care. And that is just kind of one of the best things that I found, is that she just accepts me as I am. And we're very fluid in identities, so she accepts that as a non-binary person I might flux in my gender identity, but she still loves me, and that's kind of something that I'd never experienced before. So it was very much a kind of, okay, I found this person, that is it. For me, it was very kind of clear cut. But before I got married, I really didn't think that I'd ever be married or I'd ever be in a relationship, because I just didn't have that experience or knowledge or know how I'd even go about that when everyone seemed to think that I was broken or wrong. So I think often disabled people are thought to not be in relationships or to be asexual or not to have sort of non-heteronormative relationships. That's often the case. People usually, I'll mention that I'm married, and they'll be very surprised. And I've also, whenever I go anywhere with my wife, like a couple of weeks ago, I took her to the dentist, and my dentist said, "Oh, your sister." I said, "No, wife," and that just ended the conversation. It was just silence. And I was like, right, okay. Moving on then. But that's often the case. Our old landlord thought we were sisters, and I was so worried about, housing discrimination that I just let him think that. I was like, okay, well, this is what it'll be, because we don't need you to know anything really about us. So yeah, it does. Whenever people ask about, whether I'm married or in a relationship, they're always surprised when I say yes, because the idea is that if I'm disabled, then I shouldn't be in a relationship, or I shouldn't even have the capacity to love. And I think that's what people often forget, is that everybody does have that capacity to love. It's just, it might look different for people, and relationships might seem different, but everyone does have that capacity. I think it's really important to have good representation, very positive representation, particularly in the media, because if one person can see themselves and see themselves reflected in the media, then it kind of gives you hope that actually you're not on your own, and there are people out there who are like you and are successful. So I think it's really important, and often, there's misconceptions in the media, particularly around trans people, and that has such a massive impact, not only on trans people and the way they see themselves, but also on how everybody sees us and how everybody thinks that they can then behave towards us. And with disability, there is such a tragedy storyline with it that everyone just thinks that that's all we are, is a person to pity, whereas actually disabled people can do pretty much anything. And we have a high level of resilience, which is a good thing, but the fact that we have to have one is not. So it's kind of, representation is such an important thing, because I know that if I was growing up now with positive media representation of disability, or if there were even, good visible role models of trans disabled people, then I know that my childhood would have been very different, and I would have come out at an earlier age. But of course, you have to be safe, and you have to figure out what's right for you. But I think it is really important for any, positive representation, not just simply representation, because I think that's often confused.